Welcome to New Money. I'm Bryan. This evening we're focusing once again on the investment world. Last week, the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor commented that there's a good case for domestic interest rates staying higher for longer. This is because financial conditions have tightened and government borrowing needs to have risen. Virtually, the market this year has been mainly volatile when comments are made about interest rates and inflation. Up where there is belief that interest rates have come to an end of the tightening, and down when hawkish comments from the Federal Reserve in the USA indicate that this may not yet be over. Our Reserve Governor went on to say that there still seems to be a good case for keeping rates higher for longer domestically because the government needed to borrow money at the time when global interest rates were high. And joining me this evening is a very happy David Shapiro, Chief Global Equity Strategist, and Craig Fiver, Chief Investment Strategist, both from Sasfin Wealth. David's an Arsenal supporter, Craig's a Villa supporter, so David, I've never seen you look so happy. Well, Craig, let's just talk about these interest rates. I'm puzzled because I thought interest rates were a function of inflation. Now we seem to be bringing in the need for government borrowing.
Yeah, there's a lot in that statement, a lot of variables. But I think at the end of the day, the governor was just trying to take the stance that inflation is not yet under control, although they see a 2-year window where it does come into closer to the midpoint of the range. So yeah, I think all these other things are secondary. It's more about inflation. They have a single mandate, really, to focus on inflation. And he's just joining the rest of the central bankers around the world in just trying to keep everybody restrained and not think rates are going to collapse now and you can just go out and spend, which would push inflation up. So I think he wants to manage inflation expectations as well, get them closer to the midpoint of the range, because they're still elevated.
So government borrowing is not something, because again, that's out of the hands of the individual.
Yes, even at the last meeting in the press kind of questions afterwards, somebody asked him something related to fiscal policy, and he even said, listen, go talk to Treasury. We're talking here today about monetary policy. So yeah, I think the borrowing things are out of scope.
Okay, so let's now move. Dave, we're nearly at the end of the year. Markets don't know calendars. Everyone goes January to December, although market doesn't have a calendar, does it? But Dave, looking ahead, let's talk. I mean, we had a superb November, and let's now think about going forward. And I'm not even going to ask you about 2024. I'm going to ask you about the next 12 to 24 months. How are you feeling about markets? Can you see this rise in 2023 continuing through for the next 2 years?
Maybe not at the same pace, but certainly rising. I think if you go back 3 or 4 years, we've come through the toughest 3 or 4 years that I have known. I know that sounds a little dramatic.
That's 50 years in the market.
It is 50 years, simply because we'd never ever had anything like COVID. And as soon as we were coming out of this, we had the war, Russia invading Ukraine. So we've had a tough couple of years. But I think, and as Craig was talking about, we were talking about interest rates. We also had the Fed pushing up rates at a pace that we haven't seen for a long time as well. It's not the level of interest rates, it's the pace at which it went from 0 to 4 or 5, wherever we are in the US. So, but we're coming to the end of that. And I think that's the positive. So slowly we're working out of the imbalances that were created by COVID, that were created by Russia invading Ukraine, and also getting on top of inflation, or starting to see inflation come down, perhaps not at the levels that we wanted. So all of those conditions favor equity markets, and but it will take some time. I don't think we're going to get a dramatic pace in the gains of equity markets, but certainly I expect them to be better than they are at the moment. But what level, I don't know.
Craig, when we talk about interest rates, I mean, America talking about inflation back to 2%. Can they get it back to 2%?
I think it's going to take probably 2 years, to get close there. We're going to muddle around 3, maybe get to 2.5, but to really finesse it to 2, I think it's going to take a long time. So, but I think the governor and the Fed would be happier with something at least with a 2 handle. Even if it's 2.5, 2.6, they'll lighten up on interest rate and the very tight restrictive monetary policy that they have there now.
And then, David, when you manage a portfolio, you talked about these high rates of interest rates, the speed of increasing interest rates. We've had third quarter earnings announced. How has interest rates, these high interest rates, that affected the earnings? And obviously, there's some companies that haven't been affected, and some that are really affected so badly that their results certainly, and some of the performances are affected.
You mentioned 4 different types of companies, and you have to distinguish those different companies. You know, those that have borrowed, of course, are going to feel it. What the market is saying, or what analysts are saying, we haven't felt the effects of those high interest rates yet. And that's why the pessimists come from that angle, saying it's still going to, it's still in the system. It still has to work its way into the system and then out of it. So we haven't seen the worst effects. That's what the bears are saying. But when you look at a number of businesses, like in the US, when I go through results, and I have to tell you that I'm much more company-driven than economic-driven. In other words, I look at the individual businesses themselves and see whether they're positioned to handle these kind of interest rates. And that's where we tend to put our money, in those businesses that are strong enough, generating a lot of cash, generating products or selling their products at levels where they can still withstand higher interest rates. But I think, just to summarize it, yes, there are going to be companies that feel the pressure. For example, you might find capital-intensive businesses, or like utilities. Utilities, who provide electricity or provide water, generally they borrow money to expand their businesses and that. So when you're borrowing at a higher rate and you have to charge a regulated fee, yes, it does squeeze. I hope that was, I hope you understand what I'm saying from that point of view. But those kind of companies do come under pressure, whereas your tech companies, who generate such high levels of income and at such high margins, don't feel the effect as badly as some of the other businesses.
And they benefit because they've got a lot of cash in their balance sheets. David, we talked about the Super 15.